Good morning. My name's Kelly Murray. I'm with the Consortium for Service Innovation in the KCS Academy. Thanks very much for being here. I figure we'll just do a couple housekeeping items before we get started. So this is a KCS in Action web session. We host these the last week of the month, and the next one will be on Tuesday, July 30th at 10 a.m. Pacific. So Tara Fuller from McKesson will be presenting that one. I'll put links to upcoming events in the chat. We're also hosting the KCS Academy World Tour in Boston on September 23rd, and that is sort of KCS in Action Live, so a one-day event with lots of different stories from lots of different folks about KCS. We are anticipating lots of folks on the call, so I've muted everyone. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. I will monitor those as we go through. And we're recording this call, so you'll get a link to the recording after we're done. And today I'm so pleased to introduce Arnfinn Austefjord, and he's the brand new global head of the KCS Academy. He just joined the staff here at the beginning of the month. And he's going to talk about improving coaching with automation, I think largely based on his years of experience at Oracle, with some special guests thrown in for good measure. So take it away, Arnfinn.
Thank you very much. So let me go ahead and share here. Put in a slideshow. So first, a quick introduction. So as Kelly mentioned, I joined at the beginning of the month as the head of the KCS Academy. I'm very, very excited about this. A little bit of my background. I spent about 2 decades in leading customer services transformation at Oracle and at Sun Microsystems. And I focused mainly in self-service knowledge and communities, but I also ran remote support and proactive support. And then we also were driving, there's a continuum between learning and performance support. And so we also did quite a bit of micro-learning. I then went on to ServiceNow, where I was leading up the product management strategy for knowledge, self-service, and community. And we were able to get KCS V6 verified. So I kind of have that, that background. Been engaged in the consortium for over a decade, and I was honored to be named as one of the innovators. Also, as I've been responsible for portals, been engaged in judging the top 10 support sites for, I think this is my 5th year now, and one with our sites at Oracle. Prior to my career in support, I spent about a decade in training. So leading worldwide training, delivery and certification, as well as development. And so this was a dream job to really bring my 2 passions for training and certification along with services transformation / innovation. So very, very happy to be here. And let's get into this topic. So what I'd like to do is review the coaching objectives and our current tools. So we'll go over PAR, formerly PII, AQI, radar charts, and then talk about the automation opportunities. And then if Pat, hopefully Pat's joined or joining soon, we'll go through a current example of what Oracle's been doing with supporting the coaching and efforts. So we'll give you some real live examples, and I'd love to hear from all of you if you've also implemented some of these. So we'll have some time for dialogue at the end and some Q&A. So let's first go through the main coaching objectives. So we want our agents to search and use knowledge as part of the case workflow. So that no knowledge applicable really should be the exception. That was one of our key areas at Oracle to really drive that participation up. And I know at many of the consortium events, I would poll the members asking them what percentage of your cases were actually no knowledge applicable. And it was pretty uniformly around 5%. So definitely the exception. And so we use that industry benchmark to bring back in. And that was very helpful. So once they're in the game and participating, you want to make sure they're linking, but not just linking, you want to make sure they're linking accurately. And then once they're linking, you can think of that link in many cases as a defect, if you will, that the customer wasn't able to find it via self-service. So how can they improve that knowledge? And this is actually one of the hardest things to coach, is to get them to improve the knowledge that they linked. And then finally, if it was a new problem, then that they're creating quality knowledge. So these are the key objectives. And let's go through some of the tools. So we'll first start out with PAR. That was formerly PII, which is great. It was renamed because PII was often confused with personal identification. And so people were often confused on how is KCS dealing with personal information, rather. So it was renamed to PAR. And I'll just walk through this. You'll have your knowledge workers. They're associated with teams. You'll have your coach often do a sample. And so you'll have here the cases they're reviewing. In this case for John, they're reviewing 24. Coach actually has to go through and determine, of those 24 cases, how many were actually knowledge candidates. And then the system, if you have a nicely integrated, the system will provide, okay, of those candidates, how many were they linked an article? And then the system will then calculate the link rate. And then the system will say, here's how many were modified. And then the coach will have to look at, well, what were the number of modified candidates? And then similar thing, the system, again, if it's nicely integrated and giving you the reports, will tell you how many of those sample cases where you had knowledge created, and the coach will look to see how many were created candidates. And then to calculate, so we calculated the link rate just on the KB candidates and the articles linked to those candidates. So here you can see they're getting a 100% link rate. For the contribution index, it's looking at all of what they did. So the 20, the 4, well, and 7. And let me use this one. They actually linked once and they created one. So they did 2 times over the opportunities. So that would be the how many times did they have an opportunity link? So 6. How many were modified candidates? 1, and create 1. So 2 over 8, and that gets you your contribution index. And then so that's calculated for you. And then lastly, sorry about that. How many of those were relevant links? And again, this is what the coach will have to do, is go through all of those links and ensure that they were appropriate. And then that gives you the link accuracy score. And then so you'll see it for each individual, and then you'll see here down here the group average. So a great tool to see that your agents, your knowledge workers are engaged in the KCS process. But again, very, very time consuming. So let's look at the AQI. And this, I just did a very, very simple simple mock-up here, where you'll have your criteria, whether the article is unique, meaning it's not duplicate, it's complete, the content is clear, the title is appropriate, all of the hyperlinks are valid, and the metadata is correct. And so then literally the coach is going through each one. Is it true or false? And that's typically, I've seen some where they put a scale, but ideally you're just doing true or false. Many are weighting this, so rather than each score, each area just being equal weighting, many are weighting others higher. Oftentimes because duplicates are not good for the system, oftentimes they're weighting the duplicates higher. So in this case, it was a duplicate, and the hyperlink was not valid. So they had a score 40 out of 100 here. And then one of the other great coaching tools, manager tools, is looking at radar charts, where you can compare the individual to the group average. Notice you're not comparing it to a stack ranking, but rather just the team average. In this case, John is exceeding in all areas. Oftentimes you'll have a person who is not exceeding in one area. It was maybe well below, but exceeding in other areas. So it really gives you a nice balanced scorecard here. And it's great to assess the value, but it's also great for the individual to see how they compare to the team. Because often, again, for privacy, et cetera, they don't really see how they're comparing to their teammates, but we can give them the opportunity to see how they are comparing to the team. Now, often this again is a periodic update where they're looking at the radar chart. It's not always real time. So we'll talk about some of these opportunities. So let's talk about some of the automation opportunities. So these are all tremendous tools, but again, they're very time intensive. And in speaking with customers and other members, this is always one of the areas that where they never have enough coaching resources. They're trying to get down to a good ratio, or when they're trying to start out, they are trying to get the appropriate number of coaches to do it correctly. And this is always a challenge to get the number of coaches there. So ideally with automation, we're looking at how we can minimize that human coaching engagement, how we can offload some of this to automation, and also use automation to pinpoint the coaching opportunities. So then rather than a coach looking at a random sample, they're actually provided with potential issues with that knowledge worker. So let's now go through some of the opportunities. So a closure assist. So first thing we said is get them in the game, meaning get them to leverage knowledge in their case flow. So here we have John Doe, Jane Doe, and Jim Smith, and knowledge applicable, meaning, and I kind of switched this instead of no knowledge applicable, rather looking at where they did create cases with knowledge linked. And that where they had cases with knowledge linked, either they're reusing an existing article or linking a new article. So here, John is at 65% of his cases had knowledge linked to it. Jane had 90% and Jim had 40% with a team average of 80. So here we're taking that radar chart concept, but having it in the workflow. So as in this case, John is closing a case without any knowledge linked. So here they would get a yellow, if you will, and you use colors here to help illustrate here, where the system is telling them they're below the team average of 80% of knowledge applicable for cases. Are you sure there's no existing knowledge solution that can be linked or new article created? So it's more in the moment coaching. So one, it's giving them insight into how they're doing compared to their team, and a reminder of the importance of the knowledge. But it is contextual to the person. So John gets this message that he's below the team average. So it's yellow. Jane closes one without any knowledge linked or knowledge linked there. And she doesn't get a message because she's above the team average. And we're trusting her that she knows when it's appropriate. And so we don't want to bother her with a message when she's above the team average. Jim is well below the team average. So we're giving him a message that he's significantly below the team average. And again, giving him insight into where he's compares to the team, and giving him an opportunity to link or reuse an existing article or create a new. So that, and this, many of you, again, and and Pat's on also, he'll show you some of the comparison charts, but being able to compare people to the team average is very helpful for them, but to be able to do it in the moment is even better. And I was actually talking to Pat before this, kind of running this by, and this was while he's doing, and he'll show you some of this, this was on his request for the engineering to have this more in the moment. So, and again, this is not any crazy advanced machine learning or anything. This is just simple logic comparing how they are to the team average and then providing the appropriate message. So hopefully this gets them in the game more. They say, hey, the knowledge is critical to use. And so now that they are, hopefully this is helping, now we're leveraging the case article mapping for some further automation. So I think all of you, I would imagine, have this. If you're creating knowledge as byproduct of the case, you're mapping the product to the applies to, the case title to the article title, short description of the issue, resolution to the resolution, cause of the cause. And again, in all of the cases, you're using this just for the knowledge create, where ideally you're just hitting a button and creating knowledge, a draft article as a byproduct of that case, having the user clean it up a little bit and then publish, depending on their workflow. It'll go to either publish directly or go to the appropriate review. But we can use this as an opportunity for link accuracy. So here we have a solved article that was applied to this link to this case. And here the customer is stating for their 2010 Ford Expedition that their car won't start. And the resolution was replace a battery, and the cause was dead battery. And this is what I find very often is then the agent says, oh yeah, that was a dead battery. I'm going to link how to replace a car battery. So a very solution-centric article. And this is often, again, the case and this is a big opportunity for your knowledge workers to improve the knowledge, is put it more in the customer context. So ensuring that the applies to is correct and that the issue is really in the customer context, not solution-centric battery's dead, but rather my car won't start. So here, and again, let me just close this real quick. Sorry, I have all the participants in the, there we go. So, oops, let me go back. So here, you're leveraging the comparison, again, field by field. So early on, we were looking at how we compare the article linked to the case itself. And there's so much dialogue going back and forth that's very hard to do a similarity. But if you can, given all of the solutions are comparing field to field, really just focus on those fields. So here, again, we're looking at it and say, well, in this case, the title, the product is not included in the article, the symptom is not included. So we're giving them real time a link accuracy score of 50. So here, the knowledge worker has several options. They can see that they got caught in linking an article that was not appropriate. And they can then, so they were maybe linking for linking's sake, and they can pick the more appropriate article for solving, because they're definitely not going to want to improve, get this article up to an accurate by improving it if it's not the correct. They can find the appropriate article and link it, or they can, if there's none, then they can create. But here, or they can, their last option is to just link with a low accuracy score. And this, again, may be a good coaching opportunity. So they link it, they don't know how to improve this. So they link, and now the coach can really focus on, here's a link by this knowledge worker that wasn't accurate. How can they help them improve the article or improve finding the appropriate article? But we don't want to just give them an accuracy score. We want to help them, kind of a gamification, improve that. So here we can offer up by looking at comparing the fields and ask if we should apply the 2010 Ford Expedition to the applies to, if we should add it there. If they click yes here, now you'll see the scores going up to 75, and they're yellow. Then if they go to add the customer context symptom, so add car won't start, to the issue. They click yes, and now they're up to a link accuracy of 100. So it's kind of it's two things, well, several things. It's giving that knowledge worker insight into how accurate that article compared to the case that they're working, and giving them a score. So in many, like the gamification of how can I get to green real time, not after the fact, but rather than them having to look and manually apply it, the automation should be able to, again, give them opportunities to apply, and when they take advantage of that, if they are appropriate, then it's improving the accuracy score. And Pat will show you an early rendition. In fact, many of these coaching assistants really was inspired by the work that Pat did early on in Oracle. And many of these are actually several years old. So it's not the latest and greatest technology. It's just applying it to the coaching. And that's one of the things that I've kind of seen across the industry is with machine learning, automation, they're applying it rightfully for how do you move that issue up that value curve to more self-service, automation, elimination. But we really have an opportunity to, and then really having the agent as the exception, similar thing here with coaching. How do we look at these coaching moments, if you will, and how do we move that up the value curve? So it's one, more value for that user to provide them the real-time coaching context, and then that again reduces the engagement needed of your human coach. So that's one opportunity, is in knowledge linking and link accuracy, and I think that's a pain I've seen across all our members. Is well, first getting them in the game where they're actually using knowledge and linking, and hopefully that other one that I showed you helps in that regard. And then once they are linking, to assess the link accuracy score and give them feedback on that. But again, the one area that many customers, many members struggle with is not only link accuracy, but having them to improve that article. And this kind of does both, where it assesses link accuracy and gives them opportunity to improve. So let's also look at that AQI that we showed earlier. One of the, again, there's opportunities for automation here. Many vendors are coming out with similarity engines where they're looking at not just doing a search. So when someone's creating a knowledge article, comparing that to the knowledge base, oftentimes in the past, they were just looking at the title and comparing it. So not a very good assessment of similar articles. But that's being really refined now with a lot of machine learning to improve that similarity score. And the use cases I've seen from vendors are giving that real-time feedback to that author that there are potential similar articles, and actually flagging them. Well, not flagging literally, let's use a different term, pointing them out so that that author can assess those and determine truly if they do have a unique article and proceed, or if it's better that they should have just updated one of the other articles. But, and they're also looking at using that similarity score to then in the knowledge document viewer to show similar articles to that customer who's looking at that article. So kind of helping in the with the findability for the user, as well as for that knowledge worker to help them not put in a duplicate article. But we can take it one step further then to, rather than just have that as a use case, ideally these are flagging, and I keep using the term flag instead of, these are highlighting areas for the coaches that rather than a random, where they can look at potential issue with their knowledge worker. So again, if we're highlighting here that a very high similarity score for this article, And then now if they double click on this, then the coach can see the other articles that it was compared to that is thought of similar. So now again, the coach is focused on, rather than just a random sample of articles that they're looking at for the AQI, they can be offered up the ones that are a potential, a higher probability of needing coaching. And again, if they're pulling it up, so hopefully they're getting a report on here are the articles that they should be taking a look at. If they do pull up an article, though, it should be real time, where they're seeing that this has a very high similarity score. So rather than the coach having to do it from scratch, where they're looking at similar articles, it's already pre-populated for them. The other opportunity, and many companies are actually doing this, is running broken link scripts. So they're taking a look at running it against the knowledge base, running the links to see if they are all, trying to open all the links to see if they are valid. And then if there are any invalid links, then what some companies are doing, I know Oracle has been doing this for quite a while, where they are actually generating tasks to that author that for your article, you have the following broken link, and then having it as an actionable task that they need to follow through. And it's a measurable one where you can have a certain SLA around that. But so that's, rather than, I know many companies are looking at relying on their users to identify broken links, or the coach to identify the broken link, where truly, in this case, this is really low-hanging fruit where you can run a script to identify that. So ideally, you're sending that off real time, just in time for a task, but also, as this is one of the criteria, you're showing it up in the AQI. So a lot of opportunities for automation, and some are lower hanging fruit. I know some will require support from your vendor, or if you have a third party, your homegrown tool requires some support there. But by putting those requirements in, then we can get the vendors focused on helping the coach, because that's, again, I think been a void in the use cases. But then also we're having members share how they are doing some of these things to support their coach, leveraging automation. So what I'd like to do, and we'll have plenty of time to dialogue here and drill down on hopefully some of you also sharing yours, but I'd like to pass it over to Pat to share some of his examples for helping, again, ensure they're getting in the game, so comparing them to their team averages, and helping to improve the articles. I don't think, Pat, you have that's kind of behind the scenes as far as the script for broken links, but maybe you can talk to that more. But Pat, you want to, I will stop sharing and you can take over.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, let me go ahead and share. Okay. So as Arnfinn said, my name is Pat McBride. I'm a product and program manager at Oracle in our knowledge management space. Just to clarify, I don't work in the product side, I work in the support side. So in how we've implemented our knowledge management solutions internally, as opposed to the actual knowledge products Oracle sells, just to clarify. So just quickly, safe harbor, nothing I'm showing today is intended to imply anything in our products, since this is an internal implementation, which most of what I'm showing is you today is customized. Okay, so let's talk challenges. We have a lot of the challenges that Arnfinn talked about: linking and accuracy, getting people to flag and fix content when they use it, the decision points around authoring, ignoring the unresolved and abandoned issues. So, some of the complexity of our issues, people log a ticket and just don't come back. How do we kind of segment those out and not pay attention to those while still focusing on, judging and evaluating people on the tickets that we really care about? And then I think everybody has this problem, people who sort of learn what they're measured on and start to try to game the system and, tick the boxes to to win. The challenge at Oracle is especially difficult for us leading the program because we have more than 10,000 people in support and across wide, diverse set of products. So we have everything from hardware to software to middleware, cloud, on-premise. It's a little bit of everything, which makes it really difficult because I can't go meet with every coach and talk to them. So we had to, train them, but we also wanted to provide some reasonable way to guide them and to govern that through meaningful metrics. So a while back, we decided to start by implementing what we call our closure wizard. And we started this closure wizard off by, trying to make it a win-win solution for our support engineers. So they complained because when they closed a ticket, they'd get a whole bunch of errors for things they hadn't done. We like the idea of sort of streamlining that, putting it into a flow, and then also along the way, capturing the data so we could actually measure what we want to. So the first thing is, again, did they resolve it? So you can see here, these categories highlighted in green are what we consider resolved issues. The other ones are considered unresolved, so the user abandoned it. So we don't measure those directly. We don't look at those individual issues unless we see this person starting to abuse that status, and we can compare people to their team and really monitor that. So I'll show you how that looks in a few minutes. This is what the closure wizard looks like. So you can see the user clicks the close button. It takes them through a flow. It's a dynamic flow based upon information on the ticket. So they pick this resolution, which is this first tab that you don't see. We have something called Oracle's diagnostic methodology, which is essentially a structure to the ticket. So Arnfinn was showing you those mappings of issue to issue. This is the way we enable those mappings. So the user clarifies the issue, we map that to the problem statement in the ticket or in the knowledge article. And so this just gives us that structure for the comparison. Then they can also do things like tag errors. So if we detect, we'll parse the entire case and look for patterns, and we'll see errors that we know are errors. And if we see them, we'll pull them in and we'll ask the user when they're closing, which of these were relevant to your issue? And so they just tick a little box next to the ones that are relevant, classifying those as meaningful. Then we get to the close step. And at the close step, we ask them this question. We say, did knowledge solve this issue? And they can either say nothing was learned from this service request that would apply to anybody, or they can say one or more knowledge or web links provided the solution. And then they can obviously author as well. So we really try to discourage them from picking this, but we do allow them to say nothing was learned. And again, just like with the abandoned issues, if they're saying nothing's learned, this is a data point that we can track. So now we know every ticket, we know 5% of your tickets were unresolved, 10% of your work you said nothing was learned, and there's no knowledge appropriate to this. And so you can start to do this comparison between you and your team and see how you're setting those values. So then this is the part that I was most excited when we got to build. This is basically, instead of pestering the heck out of people to link, right? The constant battle in KCS is link, link, link. And we said, we can make that problem go away. So what we did is we just parsed the ticket or the service request for every single pattern of a document ID. And when we find them, we automatically just suck them into the closure process. So you don't have to link anymore. We do it for you. And then we just say which ones are relevant. And you'll notice there's 3 values here. Some of them don't have a radio button next to solve. And that's because we noticed that we had issues with people linking things that couldn't be solutions. So we might have a diagnostic, or we might have something we call an information center, which is just an aggregation of content around a topic. And those really aren't solutions, but people would link them all the time. And so in order to make that go away, we decided to create a library of things that couldn't be solutions, and we just disabled the solve. So it can assist, but it can't solve. And this gave us much more accuracy, because now they have to say it was resolved, a knowledge article is relevant, and then they can pick, but they can only pick the ones that actually are likely to be meaningful. When they pick one that's solved, this is where we do comparisons. So we'll come in and say, you tagged an error as relevant. We found a reference to a bug that you said was relevant to this issue, but the document you linked doesn't include any of those. So what we'll do is we'll offer it up as an easy fix. Do you want to add this bug or this error to this document? And so we actually have a series of recommendations that we can make: errors, bugs, products. So as Arnfinn shared, his example of, is the Ford relevant to this battery scenario? We do that with products, versions. If we have something that we've archived because it wasn't being used heavily, we give the person an opportunity to republish it, put it back into circulation. We ask them if it's current. So if nobody's touched this document in, let's say, 12 months, we just say, is this current? And if it is, then they can just mark it as current, and that basically just refreshes the review date on it, gives people confidence that the document is still valid. They can also add a comment, so suggest a different improvement. You see that right here. One of the things that we did notice is that this was used by some people and some people ignored it. And so we saw this pattern of repeatedly making these recommendations, and we could track that through clickstream monitoring, but people weren't implementing them. And so the next step then was looking at how we automate some of that. So if the recommendation is made more than, let's say, 3 times in 6 months, let's just implement it, right? 5 people have said this error is relevant. The error's never been added to the document. Let's go ahead and just crowd authenticate and implement. This is something that one of the consortium events, I think Michael Wu did a presentation on how they were using, this wisdom of the crowd to drive improvements into communities, and it was an inspiration for doing the same thing within our the knowledge improvement process. Let's see. So what does this look like to a manager? So you can see here, this is a manager view when they're doing a performance review, and we have this in multiple formats. But they can see their employees. This is for a period of time, how many tickets they closed, and then they can see what we call KM eligible. This means what percentage of your tickets reached a resolved state. And so in this case, the team average is 80%, and so we're benchmarking off of that 80% and calling out people more than a certain number of standard deviations outside the norm. And you can see here, 59% for this person means they're yellow. Some of it down here is at 33%. And so they're not setting the ticket to be knowledge eligible. And so obviously we don't want to measure, a third of their work for knowledge creation. We want to call out, hey, you need to close your tickets correctly. Same thing with nothing learned, or that customer specific, as we used to call it. Right, this person, 33% of the work they do, they're saying, I didn't learn anything. Let's go have an opportunity to do targeted coaching in this case, because we see that as an issue. And then similarly, what percentage of them are unresolved is kind of the inverse of the KM eligible. And then we can see what percentage did they link existing knowledge, what percent did they create knowledge. And you'll notice a couple things. One is we're calling out the low number, but we're calling out the high number too. What we found is that people who always link, there's probably a link accuracy question, and we wanted to call that out for attention, because we find that when we see 100%, it's oftentimes, let's talk to them at least to figure out what they're doing so well, but more than likely, we're going to find some issues with the quality of the linking there. This case is probably not accurate because there's only 1 ticket they closed, but you get the idea. Future state concepts. So this is something Arnfinn talked about. This is kind of on the drawing board for us, but just to share, when you go to close a ticket, not just showing, what you can do to improve it on that screen, but really saying, hey, it's a 37% match, give you some immediate feedback on quality, give you the document, and then give you the easy way to just add symptoms, right? So there's an error that you don't have included. The bug is not listed on the document. You didn't mention a patch. Maybe there's a diagnostic that you used in order to gather information, and that's not referenced anywhere in here as a document that would be helpful in gathering some of this data. So again, just make it really easy to sort of click and drive this number from a red frown to a green smiley, and gamify it a little bit so that people are motivated to do the right thing. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We have some other metrics tools that we use to sort of put this in front of people. We have manager daily dashboards, which the manager is expected to go in every day, and we start red flagging scenarios if they have certain users who aren't participating. So there's multiple channels that we have where we've incorporated this in, as well as what we call PLA or product line reports, which bubble it up at an organization level as opposed to a manager level to call attention to these metrics. So we've really kind of incorporated these themes of metrics in a whole bunch of different channels, and it's been pretty successful in getting attention to places, getting coaches to do targeted interventions instead of doing kind of a one-size-fits-all approach across the organization. So that's all I had for you today. I'm happy to take questions, Arnfinn, if you had any.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I would like to just emphasize what Pat was highlighting at the end. Forgot to mention that in my slides, but what is very, very helpful, I found, is that when you are that you're not just having the coach, get them to get in the game, meaning less no knowledge applicable cases. But what I did, which I thought helped get a lot of desire for action for coaching, is I would present up to the senior VP how the VPs are doing on these key activity and outcomes. And again, we would goal on the outcomes, but we would show and trend the activities. But one of the things that we would look at as an example is no knowledge applicable. What percent of the cases had no knowledge applicable? And we had, I gave the SVP the data point of industry average is 5%, and then I showed how their teams were doing. And I think at that time we had a no knowledge applicable about 30%, but some teams were at 60%. And that certainly those teams who were very low, they saw that as an opportunity. And what I then correlated was, if those who have knowledge applicable and who are high on this are actually doing really well on the outcome measures with percent of self-solve visits without case create, et cetera. And so that really drove the demand. So the first thing the VPs wanted to look at were their teams. How are their teams doing? And the teams would like to look at the individuals. And so that then helped drive the demand for coaching. So rather than coach kind of doing an uphill, it was truly coaching on helping them be successful. And that I've found extremely valuable, again, to do that high level. So not just the coaching ideally is complemented with higher level visibility. And then the other beautiful thing when you are with these radar charts or where you're comparing the team average, as the team is, as people are then improving, the team average is improving. So it continually improves in those areas. So that's also a very helpful thing by giving them access, visibility to the team average so they can better do the right thing. The team average just continues to increase. So a lot of nice things. But I saw in the chat there were questions about, hey, is this part of V6? So would like to, and Kelly masterfully handled those. I just would like to reinforce that today we're looking for the PAR and the AQI, and that they have the ability to do it, but we want to constantly raise the bar with the vendors. And in fact, not that they can just do PAR, but in the future, we'd like that more integrated. So rather than having your coaches do the AQI or the PAR in spreadsheets, that it's integrated in the system for, and then reducing their level of effort as well as improving the reporting. I saw many were mentioning Salesforce and ServiceNow. Salesforce actually did late last year, they did improve their AQI, where it's now integrated, and in their app store, if you just put just type in Google Salesforce AQI app. You'll see now in their app store how it's a much nicer integration there. But what we wanted to do here is just really share. Typically in the KCS in action, you're looking at real-time things that more established. Here we wanted to show kind of the art of the possible and stimulate some dialogue on what some other members are doing and what truly are the demands. And then we'd be looking at incorporating that in a future KCS verified. But Kelly, what were some of the other questions that?
I am flipping through here. We had lots of questions about how do I make this functional in my realm. Give me just a second here. One question that I had was for both you and Pat. So we talk a lot about how link accuracy is more important than link rate. And so I was curious about the timing in terms of it feels like two separate steps in terms of you have no knowledge attached to this article, right? So that's one message. And then the second, is this true? The second message is here's some possible knowledge that you could attach to this article. So were those two things linked? Did you do those things at the same time in terms of, hey, you're not attaching knowledge and therefore the question, right, is were you driving bad behavior in terms of where's your link versus here's some knowledge that looks like it is more accurate for your article or for your case? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So, I mean, we really thought we measured things this way before we put this wizard in, but it was incredibly painful and manual. So we'd sample, right? And so what we wanted to know is like, we don't care if if the user just stopped responding, right? That's something out of your data set. You don't want to pay attention to that. So we wanted to, have a way to do that, but we didn't want people to abuse it because we're always trying to think about how is the person going to game this and abuse this, so we don't end up creating a metric that doesn't mean anything. So we had that. Then we had this categorization of knowledge is not applicable or knowledge is applicable. And there are situations where something comes in the door and you just want to say, this is so unique to this person, right? It was a total hack customization. It would be silly to write a knowledge article. So we want to give them the opportunity to do that. We certainly want to also measure how often they're doing that so that we don't see that become a pattern that people abuse. So again, getting these as discrete data points then allows you to sort of have 100% view of, 10% are unresolved, 10% are no knowledge applicable, and then 80% have some sort of knowledge created or linked. And so that was the objective that we had in designing the wizard. You still need coaching, right? I mean, you still have to go in and look at, and this isn't going to solve everything. Even if we get, waved a magic wand and had this piece implemented tomorrow, right? I could just click everything, even though some of this stuff is crap. So you still need to have a review process, but you want to make it as easy as possible to do the right thing as you can. One example, by the way, of where we first rolled this out, people did abuse it, is I had this brilliant idea that I had a section below this, and it was, hey, we searched the knowledge base for you, and before you write an article, here's the best 5 matches that people can link, right? Do you want to pick one of these before you write an article? And lo and behold, people did a lot of picking from there. And so we were patting ourselves on the back for how brilliant we were until our Similarity Engine broke one day, and we didn't pick up on it for a few days. And it was showing the exact same 5 articles on every single ticket that was closed.
Whoopsie.
And so I decided to take advantage of that. And so I did a study of how many people linked those articles. And we had those 5 articles linked to everything. I called it the Ginsu knife thing, if you remember that commercial from back in the day. It could slice and dice and cut a can and then cut a tomato, right? That's what it was doing. It was solving everything from human resources issues to hardware to middleware to cloud problems. It was the miracle document. And so we really realized that we had to rethink that a little bit and, understand how that worked. We pulled it off, and what we're trying to do is bring it into the actual ticket. So when you're working the ticket, we're suggesting things at that point, not at closure.
Yeah, and I think the beauty about where vendors have evolved with machine learning, you're getting much more accurate recommendations, and again, having it applied to this use case. Some of the other questions asking. So we do have, again today, so both ServiceNow and Salesforce have AQI integrated in the system, so you don't have to do the spreadsheet type. I see PAR as another opportunity, and you can actually do this with a configuration a day where in either of them where you're adding fields where you are in that case, they linked, you can add a field. Was it accurate? You can also add a field. Was it modification opportunity? Was it create opportunity? So you can add those and then actually run the reports there. And I'm still learning about all the tools, but certainly workflow, where if you're creating a script for, as an example, broken links, then you should be able to do a workflow where as soon as you identify that it is sending a measurable actionable task to that author for them to resolve that broken link. So I think there's a number of things, and again, that was the idea of this dialogue. So Pat, with Oracle, that is a homegrown custom solution, but with this dialogue, what we hope to do is get people sharing what they're doing on some of the vendor tools, and then again, tapping in this collective wisdom, then two things: implement what people are already implementing, but also many of you are engaging with vendors and sharing this, the need for leveraging the automation, machine learning activities, efforts that they're doing for this, because I see this as one of the low-hanging fruit to get the vendors focused on that, and that hasn't been the case, I do not believe. And so there is, apps that people are doing to help, but there's also the corporate efforts on their official roadmap. So, and again, we will be engaging as part of the Verified to help draw that as we see that we have, good solid requirements, best practices. We'll be helping drive that as part of the future Verified criteria. But other ones that came in, Kelly, you were...
Do you ever have cases where there are multiple issues in one case? If so, how do you handle scoring the linked articles?
Many people I've seen, and others can jump in, but I've seen where they actually break those out. If you have multiple issues, they break them out into multiple cases. They're kind of incented to do that. That looks better on the metrics, but it's also better from the KCS to have those as multiple. So then you can truly, link and improve or create as needed. When you have the multiple articles, multiple issues in the same case is much harder.
There is chatter in the chat about connecting maybe in a small LinkedIn group to exchange ways people are using Salesforce to measure AQI and or PAR. So that is happening over there. What else? Does CSI certified as aligned or verified any of the apps available in the Salesforce App Store? So the aligned program would be a great place to do that. There was one app done, I think it was called Knowledge AQ by Arrivo some time ago, and that I think is also in the Salesforce App Store. We haven't heard from other folks separate from vendors that are doing things like that. If you know of apps that would be helpful, let us know and we can nudge. Let me see. There was one other.
And while you're doing that, I think one of the things that, and this is hopefully kind of spawning some of this, where, and we've seen it at the Member Summit also, where getting many of you together in sub-teams to share these things. We see it as a real opportunity, and we're going to be looking at how we can improve that collaboration. So that, for example, if we wanted to, with Kristen, if we had a demand for engaging in Salesforce apps for doing these things, or ServiceNow, or whoever right now, whatever the case, to be able to facilitate that collaboration. So that's one of the opportunity areas we're looking at, is how to best serve all of you in facilitating that collaboration.
And I don't know if we covered this a little bit ago. What are agents usually considering no knowledge applicable?
What are some examples? Oh, go ahead, Pat, if you want to.
So you're talking about examples?
Yeah.
I mentioned one. If there's a customization that nothing is relevant, that might be one. Sometimes, in the cloud space, there's some request type issues where knowledge isn't always relevant. Although I typically coach people to make sure there's at least a question. If somebody says, how do I, request a bounce of my environment, right? There's a how-to for that, even if that you can link. So I don't really like that as an excuse, but there are some oddball things in the cloud world that sometimes come in that knowledge isn't relevant. I don't have a ton of examples that I personally think are valid, but I've seen a bunch that I see people use as excuses.
Yeah, and again, I think that's a very useful metric to see. Again, I think at several member summits and other meetings, I asked just informal polling what the average was, and those who were doing it well and tracking that, they were at around 5%. And it'd be very interesting for you all to kind of track where you're at in that. And again, it may vary by company. It certainly would vary by company, but this gives you at least a data point there.
Let's see. If there is product help documentation that answers the question and could be found with the customer's context, this could be a reason for no knowledge used as far as capturing articles. Yeah. Some interest in hearing about general implementation of KCS into ServiceNow, which I think we don't quite have time for in our remaining 3 minutes.
Well, one thing, let me jump back though, just to touch on that point you just made about documentation. So I don't know about your documentation, but my documentation is typically written as, how do I set up a tax rule in my system, right? It's not written from the user's perspective of, I can't get this thing to work. And so I don't personally think it's a legitimate link when somebody links to the product documentation, unless the user is saying, where's the product documentation? Or, how do I set this feature up? And it's in the documentation under that name, right? The point of knowledge is to create a bridge from the user's perspective to the solution. So don't copy and paste it, but write the article and point to the documentation for how to implement the feature.
Yeah, and that's one of the things with KCS V6, that the documentation not only has to be available to that audience and maintained, but it also needs to be findable. So if you have to go through 100 pages of documentation to try to browse through to find your solution, doesn't meet that criteria. So as Pat said, then that is an opportunity to create a bridge article where you're putting the issue, the cost solution, et cetera, and then pointing to that for the very detailed, and ideally you have a deep link into that documentation for the detailed instructions. But I know we're running out, and again, thank you all for the participation. And again, this we definitely see a need here, and so again, we wanted to spark the dialogue, and it looks like from this, many others are going to have kind of some sub teams going, and share best practices on how to do it in various tools. And that'll also help kind of formulate some of the specific requirements in those. But again, Kelly and I and Matt and others are going to be how we can improve some of this facilitation for you. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you to Arnfinn and to Pat. And I will send out a recording of this web session in probably the next 24 hours. And let us know if there's other topics you want to keep talking about. We're happy to facilitate those. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.